And so today it's a pleasure for me actually to host a session on terrestrial ecosystems. I want to take this moment actually to celebrate all of us that have been working with climate change in Puerto Rico and in the US Virgin Islands, and actually showcase and highlight all the work that we've been doing in both of the islands to look at the impacts of climate change. Our speakers today cover a wide range of topics, including research, funding opportunities, collaboration, and partnerships from the oceans to the mountains. So it's a wide array of talks that we're going to hear about today. We are privileged, obviously, to participate with various local and federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, and academia. Our panel of speakers today have worked in different areas, including conservation, community research, research at local and global levels, all for actions and initiatives to build resilient communities, natural communities, for critical social and economical value that they bring to our islands. Frequently, many of us get lost in our day-to-day actions and activities and forget about the global value of our work, especially our actions in reducing mitigation and adapting to the current and future scenarios of climate change. Through this sharing of knowledge, innovative ideas, and creative actions in the Caribbean, through the Caribbean Climate Conference, I hope we are even more determined and motivated to explore all of the opportunities and tools we have available to develop, implement, and attain sustainable climate goals. Without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Kristin Wilson-Grimes. She is a research assistant professor at the University of Virgin Islands. Her research examines human impacts on nearshore environments, including coastal wetlands, focusing on management relevant science, and her work actively engaged communities in the US Virgin Islands on a wide range of topics from mangrove restoration to marine debris and hurricane preparedness. Each speaker, I will give you a shout out at 3 minutes, so you know that you have to finish up your presentation. I now give the screen to Kristin.
Thank you. So thank you everyone and good afternoon. My name is Dr. Kristin Wilson-Grimes, and as you heard, I'm a research assistant professor at the Center for Marine and Environmental Studies at UVI. The work that I'm going to describe to you today builds on past funding from NOAA's Marine Debris Program and its Coral Reef Conservation Program, along with the National Science Foundation through Virgin Islands EPSCoR, the National Park Service, the US Geological Survey, and the VI Territorial Emergency Management Agency. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share this work. And as many here know, mangroves are a type of coastal wetland that are found all over the world, but mangroves are vulnerable to human and natural stressors like climate change. And you can see evidence of this in these mangroves from Coral Bay and St. John. And most noticeable is the accumulation of marine and hurricane debris, as well as the many dead red mangrove trees that were damaged by the 2017 hurricanes Irma and Maria, which devastated mangrove forests across the US Virgin Islands. What you probably don't know, or what you, a little trouble with these slides advancing how I practice, but that's all right. But what you probably know too is that mangrove forests provide significant benefits to people all across the world, here in the Caribbean, and for all of us who live in the US Virgin Islands. And these ecosystems, they protect us from storm surge, they provide habitat for wildlife and many commercial fish species, they improve water quality, they can lock carbon in the deep soils that they create, and they provide wonderful opportunities for recreation, education, and of course, research. So it's important that we engage the community here in their protection, recovery, and restoration. And that's particularly important when it's viewed through the lenses of climate resilience and social equity, which are the themes of this conference. So my lab, with a lot of different partners, and you can see some of them here, have been working with the USVI community to understand how our forests are recovering from the 2017 storms and how they can become more resilient to future events through protection and restoration. One of the amazing parts of this work has been the engagement of the community, as well as the training opportunities that this work has provided for both UVI undergraduate and graduate students. One of the key ways that we've engaged the public is through citizen science and the Great Mangrove Cleanups. Those events are annual community cleanups of USVI mangrove shorelines. Globally, mangroves actually represent a data gap in terms of what we know about marine debris abundance, composition, and rates of accumulation. So the Great Mangrove Cleanups provide an important opportunity to collect these data while also engaging the public and the stewardship of this local resource. After each event, we turn the data into an infographic and we share it back out to volunteers and to other local stakeholders. We try to make these fun, timely, culturally relevant, and appropriate. And you can see the most recent example actually here from the cleanup that just happened 2 weeks ago on April 2nd. What's impressive is that over time, these efforts really add up. So since 2018, the Great Mangrove Cleanups have engaged 530 people from age 4 to 77, and they've removed 7.6 tons of marine debris from USVI mangrove shorelines. This is especially impressive when the most commonly collected items year after year are plastic and glass beverage bottles. And these cleanups are important because they reinforce the stewardship ethic. They make our forests more resilient to climate and other stressors while also preparing them for potential restoration efforts. And because the data are actually getting used in territory-wide education and policy efforts, like this curriculum that you can see on the left that we co-developed with about 60 USVI educators, and also the USVI Marine Debris Action Plan, which you can see on the right. That's a living document that was co-created with the USVI community over the past couple of years, which was just released last December. And I know Puerto Rico is in the process of developing their action plan as we speak. But both of these infographics, both of these documents, all of the infographics I just showed, plus a kid's activity book, can be downloaded at the website that's included on this slide. Beyond cleanups, our team is hard at work involving the community in other aspects of our mangrove work as well. So the goals of this work are really threefold. The first is to investigate current and historical US Virgin Islands mangrove distribution, loss, and recovery. And we're doing this by using older and newer aerial images, historical documents like maps and reports, and current technology like drones and satellite imagery. This is also in partnership with the VI Department of Planning and Natural Resources, Penn State University, the Smithsonian, and the Nature Conservancy. Next, we're seeking to grow mangrove restoration opportunities in the territory. Our work is identifying potential priority restoration sites with input from stakeholders. We're learning grow-out best practices for our mangrove species at our land-based nursery at the University of the Virgin Islands with the help of our volunteers and students. And soon we'll test different outplanting methods in different locations across the territory. And finally, our team is sharing our research with stakeholders and providing new opportunities for partnerships. One of the ways that we're doing this is through nursery tours and learning exchanges, and we're growing and evaluating a mangrove citizen science program that was initially started by the Virgin Islands Marine Advisory Service following the 2017 storms. So this spring and summer, we'll be holding community listening sessions to gather input on the design of this program and what success for it would look like by the participants themselves. So we've done a lot in the last year, including recruiting an amazing group of people to this work. And from my perspective, it's really exciting that it provides so many opportunities for training and learning, especially for UVI undergraduate and graduate students. We're expanding our reach into the local high schools as well. And this is something that we're really excited about. One of our major accomplishments in the past year includes construction of a land-based nursery from scratch. So we now have 25 tanks that are fully plumbed with fresh and salt water in the flow-through system, and 9 unplumbed tanks, and we're continuing to grow. We're also finding and collecting mangrove propagules and have started collecting data on plant phenology, which is important for our restoration activities and is new information for the USVI. For the propagules that we collect, we've created new intake protocols at the nursery so we can track individuals and learn more about which propagule characteristics are ultimately the most important predictors of germination, plant growth, and seedling survival. We're also successfully growing plants. We're growing seedlings of all 3 mangrove species, and we're learning more about the different conditions that they each prefer. We're proud of this because we hadn't grown mangroves before about this time last year, so we've been doing a lot of learning. We're especially proud of the success that we've had growing the white mangrove seedlings that you can see here and the black mangrove seedlings that you can see here, because these aren't species that are as commonly grown for restoration. Red mangroves typically are. In less than a year, we've planted thousands of plants at the nursery. And although we don't know how nursery survivorship compares to nature, because that's and unknown for here in the territory, we are working to improve survivorship through adaptive learning at the nursery. We are also designing experiments. So like the one that you can see here, which is testing the effects of container type on red mangrove growth and survival. So 5 months into this ongoing experiment, the data suggests that red mangroves survive and grow better in those yellow containers that you can see compared to the square tree pots and the round biobags. And these results will provide new practical information for restoration practitioners, demonstrating the broader impacts of this work. Just last month, we also finished a survey of 19 mangrove forests across the territory. Many local and federal partners joined us in this work, including Masters of Marine and Environmental Science alumni who are now in professional positions across the territory. And we now have the most robust data set of its kind for mangroves in the US Virgin Islands. We've started analyzing the data, and you can see an example of that here. The top graph shows the proportion of living and dead trees for each species at the site. Most of the trees are dead, and the only living large trees are red mangroves at a site that once had living trees of all 3 species. Using relative stem dominance, density, and frequency, we can calculate importance values that give us information about forest stand structure and how that may be changing, which is what the bottom panel shows. On the bottom left, a canopy that had roughly equal importance of white and black mangrove trees and the black and green now has an unequal importance of saplings of those species, which may lead to a shift in species composition, which you can see on the bottom right. When we do this sort of analysis across all 19 sites, we are starting to see differences in forest structure and composition by mangrove habitat type, site, and island. We are also collecting propagule and seedling data, which are what is shown here. These data provide information on natural regeneration, where it's occurring and where it's not for each species, and thus which sites may require assisted planting. We'll use those data along with biophysical data and a social assessment from stakeholder input to create a site-specific mangrove restoration potential index, which we will use to guide future outplanting efforts in the territory. Looking ahead, our work is focusing on working with the community to develop tools like the site-specific mangrove restoration potential index to help guide restoration. We're developing a mangrove restoration citizen science program that meets their needs and the future demands of a skilled conservation workforce. And we're also providing continued opportunities for training and learning. So if you're interested in connecting with us about something you heard about today, please reach out. Also follow us at grroe.usvi.mangroves on Instagram. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Wow. I'm a strong supporter of citizen science projects here in Puerto Rico, and we work a lot with high school and also the community in general. So I'm going to leave the mic open. We have about 4 minutes for anybody that's interested in asking questions or more information about the projects that Kristin just presented. I can start the questions and answers. So one of the things you mentioned was that you want to see how the forest is regenerating in terms of different species. But I know that when hurricanes pass through the islands, they drastically change the salinity of the sites. So how are you going to be working with that?
Sure, we collect a whole host of physical data about the sites, so environmental data about the sites themselves, which include things like pore water salinity, surface water salinity, light, canopy structure. So we also have groundwater wells in some of the sites. So we have a whole suite of the biophysical data that we will be able to couple with the biological data that we're collecting as well. So we expect that those data will be able to use in the creation of the restoration potential index that we're hoping to co-create with stakeholders. So we expect that those data will help contribute to the creation of that index. See the question in the chat. It says, if possible, please share the research regarding the containers, which may be the reasons root girdling is not affecting the specimens grown in circular containers. I understood that rectangular containers should be the preferred option. So it's thanks for that question, Nancy. One of the things that I think is interesting, this came up when you look at those different containers, right, there's trade-offs between space that you have in the nursery, resources. One of the things that we're noticing, those containers have a much smaller diameter. They're used in other nursery settings for terrestrial plants pretty commonly. That's how we found them. And right now it's looking as though they're actually doing a little bit better, but we don't know if there will be a peak, if we'll see, you know, if we continue to let this experiment run, if that effect will run off. We also don't know what will happen if we follow those plants into outplanting, which I think is actually a more interesting next step. So that's one of the things that we plan to do, is to see what happens when we outplant them and what the trade-offs there might be between those as well.
Thank you.
And then I see
a raised hand.
Yeah, raised hand.
But I don't know who it is.
Yeah, no, this is me.
Joel.
Yeah, I was actually had a question. Are you guys looking at like pests, like for example, like that could be increasing by climate change and affecting these populations?
So we do keep track in the field in two ways for pests, but that's definitely not the background of anyone in our lab. So in the field, we do know whether or not there's like a conditioned state for the trees, the mature trees or seedlings or saplings in the field. So we do know if there's lots of herbivory, but it's kind of like binned qualitative data like that. Like we just note if that's something that we're seeing. We also take note, we've had a lot of trouble with pests in the nursery setting. And that's actually one of the things that made us interested in the containers, because we think that when you reduce the surface area of the soil, that we're actually reducing the number of pests that we're seeing on the plants. But we neem the plants with neem oil like every 1 to 2 weeks, and we do spot treatments that are more if we have an infestation. We've also experimented. Now we're doing more mixed species tanks because we think that that's also helping to reduce pests. So lots of things that we're learning in the nursery. But there's a lot of different things that like to eat those plants, especially the white and black mangrove species seem to be more susceptible to pests in the nursery setting, at least.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Kristin. Now I'd like to invite Marconi Campos Cerqueira. He's going to be present. He's the chief scientist for the science officer for Rainforest Connection, and has worked for more than 12 years with them. His work is primarily in the tropics, and his interest is to develop a global acoustics monitoring network to improve biodiversity monitoring. He has used passive acoustic monitoring systems to study the impacts of natural gas exploration, mining, and forest certification of the Amazonian avifauna, and to study the effects of climate change on species distribution of frogs and birds in Puerto Rico. Marconi.
Thank you, Yogani. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you, sharing a little bit about our work. Let me start sharing my PowerPoint presentation. Can you hear me well? Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So how are birds and frogs responding to climate change in Puerto Rico, right? So as Yogani presents me, my name is Marconi Campos. I'm the chief scientist of Rainforest Connection. Rainforest Connection is an environmental tech NGO focused on improving the way that we monitor wildlife around the globe. So today I want to highlight how acoustic monitoring and species distribution models can help us understand and manage wildlife in a climate change scenario. So we all know that we are currently facing a biodiversity crisis, right? Where we are seeing the decline of many species on a global scale. And we already know that climate change is one of the main culprits of this. So more specifically, global warming is already affecting species distribution worldwide, sometimes eliminating population along the original geographic range, and also pushing species toward high latitudes and altitudes. So we were very curious to understand if climate change and global warming was actually affecting bird and frog distributions here in the island. And we asked ourselves if bird and frog distributions have actually shifted their distributions along an elevational gradient here in Puerto Rico. So to test for shifts in species distributions, we compare bird and frog historical data from available literature and museum collections against data collected by us along 3 elevational gradients in Adjunct National Forest using acoustic devices. And before I show you the main results, you may be wondering why I have opted and used acoustic devices to survey birds and frog species, right? So the number one is mainly because many bird and frog species have unique calls, and those calls are frequently associated with breeding activity. So the number one reason is that we can actually identify species by their calls, right? That's the basics. And number two, there are lots of information in acoustic files. So take a look at this spectrogram that I'm showing you right now. A spectrogram is just like a visual representation of the audio file. And that's an audio file from Panama, not from Puerto Rico. And it's just 40 seconds. And you can see that in just 40 seconds of file, I'm able to detect more than 14 species. And not only that, I'm able to identify and detect different taxonomic groups. In addition to that, we can survey many sites simultaneously, 24 hours per day for months and years with no observer bias, and we always have a permanent and verifiable record of the detected species. All right, but improving our ability to collect field data over large spatial and temporal scales poses a new challenge to us, right? So how can we actually extract useful biological information from thousands of audio files? And we have overcome this challenge by using AI tools, artificial intelligence tools, to automatically identify the species from the audio files, and then using the outputs of the AI model to build species distribution models. So going back to our original question, if birds and frog distributions have shifted along an elevational gradient in Puerto Rico, what we have found? We have found that the distribution of many species of frogs shifted toward high elevation areas because, and the reason to that is that actually we lost population in the lowlands. So take a look at the first species here, for example, Eleutherodactylus puertoricensis, the coquille de la montaña. You can see that that species used to occur from 200 meters to the top of El Yunque. But currently, the species occur only above 500 meters. That means that we lost all the populations that usually they used to occur below 500 meters. And that same pattern can be seen for other species of frogs as well. A similar pattern could also be observed with birds, although we saw a much heterogeneous response from birds. Some species expanded their distributions to high elevations and also to the lowlands, and the distribution of 2 species actually contracted in higher elevations. So our results really show and highlight the variability of species response to climate change and illustrate how acoustic monitoring really provide an easy and powerful way to monitor animal population along elevational gradients. So as you saw in the last slides, species are shifting the distributions in Puerto Rico. A lot of species are actually going upwards, up in the mountain, which can be worrisome, right? Because as climate change, species that now occur in protected areas may also shift their range outside that protected areas, increasing their vulnerability to other human impacts. So in another study, we asked if the distribution of always suitable habitats for birds and frogs overlap with the distribution of existing protected areas in Puerto Rico. And to answer that question, we took advantage of a huge database of audio files that we had from different projects in our ecosystem platform called Arbimon. So we analyzed approximately 900,000 one-minute recordings from about 700 sampling sites all around the world, the island, to get information about species of great conservation need. And I'm talking about species that are endemic, endangered, or data deficient. So we combined detection, non-detection data from 21 birds and frog species with downscaled bioclimatic variables from historical, current, and future time periods to create an ensemble model for each species using 9 different methods, 9 different algorithms to create those species distribution maps. So for each species, we have created a distribution map for the historical, current, and future time periods. We then create a map showing areas that were always suitable in all 3 periods. So our goal was to look not only at the present and the future, but the past as well, which allowed us to identify these always suitable areas. These always suitable areas incorporate historical data to find the places that provide the greatest climate suitability across time, from 40 years ago to today to 40 years in the future. And finally, we combine the always suitable maps of all species of birds and frogs and overlap this map with a current network of protected areas. So here you're seeing the map for all the birds, but we did the same thing for 8 birds. Well, it was 12 birds and 8 frogs, I think, yeah. And that's the main result. Always suitable areas for birds, as you can see at the first map at the first map where we have like a little bird. The always suitable areas for birds are primarily concentrated in the western part of the island. And in contrast, always suitable areas for frogs are mainly concentrated in the eastern and central mountain of the island, which are more humid and receive more precipitation than the western part of the island. And what we discovered is that these critical climate refugia don't always line up very well with Puerto Rico's current network of protected areas. One of the most important results is that, and saddest result is that most of the always suitable areas, about 80% of always suitable areas, are actually outside protected areas. So the main conclusion of these studies is that species are indeed shifting their distributions in Puerto Rico. And unfortunately, present protected areas will not be enough to protect endemic and endangered species under climate change scenarios. Therefore, the establishment of larger protected areas, buffer zones, and connectivity between protected areas is needed. We also show how acoustic monitoring provides a good solution to survey biodiversity at large spatial and temporal scales. And finally, we need to move forward in the way we monitor fauna here in the island and around the world, and establishing a long-term monitoring project to truly understand how biodiversity is responding to both human and natural disturbances. In attempts to improve our knowledge on how animals are responding to climate change, we actually started a collaboration with VRNA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Para la Naturaleza to create population baseline of birds and anurine species here in Puerto Rico. So last year, we surveyed approximately 900 sampling sites in Puerto Rico, as you can see here in the map, but also we included Culebra, Vieques, Desecheo, and Mona to improve our species distribution maps. So we combined those 900 sampling sites from 2021 with the additional 700 sites that we had in the past to really improve our models. And we have also installed permanent acoustic stations in 30 sites along 6 protected areas in Puerto Rico, as you can see here in the map, to continuously collect data for at least 5 years. So we install these, we call them guardians. We install these at the canopy of the trees. They are solar powered. We have like solar panels. That's the kind of flower that you're seeing here. And we are recording everything continuously and sending all the information real time. And we also have an AI model that is continuously identifying 40 species of birds and frogs and sending all the information to our platform. And all that information can actually be seen by everyone. So we created a biodiversity report page. And here I'm just showing you one example of the page that we have in that biodiversity report page, where you can see a photo of the species. Awesome, thank you. You can see a photo of the species, some vocalization, some sound clips, and the species detection can be visualized in a map or in plots. And we also have created like a mobile app where you can also listen to all real-time recordings in your phone and explore some basic information about the species that are being detected. All free, and everyone can have access to that information. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I think that's it.
Wow. All I can say, I'm really impressed with the technology and the amount of work that you guys have put in trying to resolve this issue of where the biodiversity hotspots are and what we're gonna save with the little money that we do have allocated for conservation. So I think now we have a much more clearer plan. Save the areas outside of protected areas rather than places inside of protected areas. If there's anybody with a question, Joel is helping me with the chat. Please put your questions in the chat, and that would be great. I'm just curious to know, did y'all ever do a comparison of species like bird? eBird is a huge platform in Puerto Rico where volunteer citizen scientists are giving data about bird sightings. Have you compared like species diversity of birds in those hotspots versus what you've collected over the last couple of years?
That's a great question. And actually, that's one of the next steps that we want to proceed, is really combining the data from the most recent bird breeding atlas, where the data were collected with the help of citizen science, and actually to improve that information, combine that information to improve the species distribution map. So I don't think that actually comparing it's like the most useful way to explore the data set, is actually combining them and using both type of information to improve those species distribution models. So that's definitely our next steps.
Yeah. Is anyone else?
I actually had my own question in the chat. So yeah, I was just curious about like, if you can comment a little bit about limitations with the acoustic monitoring, like either with the technology or the costs or whatever, and also any of your results already published?
Yeah, pretty much like I would say 90% of I have shown you today, like I know actually all that I showed today in this presentation is already published. And yeah, if we are talking about the cons about like acoustic monitoring, I would say that number one, the species need to produce some sound, some kind of sound to be able to, so that we can detect them using acoustic monitoring. That's definitely one of the challenges, but unfortunately, most of species, bird, frogs, insects, a lot of mammals do produce sounds. About the costs, we have been seeing like along the years a really decrease on the cost of those equipment. So right now you can buy like some recorders by like $50. And our platform, for example, like the RB1 platform, is free for everyone to use. And we are working very hard to create a lot of tutorials, videos, so that everyone can actually record and upload all the information in our system and do all the analysis that you need to understand what is happening in your study area. So I think the technology is available and exists. It's much more, I think, about creating collaboration and improve our network of collaborations to really trying to answer some of the most important questions that we have right now.
Thank you, that's awesome.
Thanks. I would like to now invite our next speaker, Eileen. I'm not sure if you have co-host privileges. Please shout out if you can.
Yes.
So let me do a brief introduction. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Eileen Helmer. She is the research ecologist at the International Institute of Tropical Forestry in Jardín Botánico, USDA Forest Service. Her research mainly focuses on tree successional dynamics and diversity across landscapes, reforesting after large-scale clearing. She works in remote sensing of tropical forests and interactions among drivers of tropical forest productivity and species composition. Her talk for today is going to focus on neotropical cloud forests and páramo to contract and dry forest and dry of decline from declines in cloud immersion and frost. So Eileen, you have to give us more information about this topic.
Hi, thanks Yogani. It's a pleasure to be here. Really enjoyed the two presentations before. Really great stuff. I can't believe it. I just want to talk a little bit about this work. So we published it a couple years ago now. We mapped, just an overview, we mapped the extent of potential cloud forest zones for all of the neotropics. And then we asked about forest cover change, and we asked about how metrics of cloud immersion might change within the potential cloud forest zones. So, so just an overview, as we've all heard, climate change might affect the cloud immersion of tropical montane cloud forests. There have been a few scattered studies that have found evidence for this. And among these studies, some studies show that cloud forest, the base heights of cloud forest, the cloud base heights will go up, decreasing the area of cloud forest, while others from other locations have found that they will actually go down. These studies tend to focus on cloud base heights, but there's another aspect to cloud forest, and that's above the average base layer of the clouds, what's happening inside, how much humidity is there, how cloudy is it? And there really hasn't been a good way to project this, at least at the scales that are important for cloud forests. So global climate change models, they're about half a degree. So think of about 50 kilometers for each cell. And then they do get downscaled to 1 kilometer now. But the basic global climate change models that predict future climate and cloudiness aren't really useful for cloud forests and places like islands where the cloud forests are very small in area. And you can't just map cloud forests based on rainfall or elevation because it varies from place to place. Even in Puerto Rico, the places where the cloud forests are vary in their rainfall and their minimum elevation. Before this study, people had mapped cloud forest areas using cloud cover from satellite imagery, but that doesn't predict the future because you don't have future satellite imagery. So our questions were, where might climate change affect cloud forests once we've mapped them? And how do these compare with protected areas and deforestation? So we developed a very simple model to model cloud forest minimum elevations. And we used that along with frost to define cloud forest areas. In the Andes, frost defines the upper limit of cloud forests. We found that on average, one to 2 days of frost per year, above that, you don't get cloud forest. It turns into humid tropical grasslands or dry tropical grasslands, páramo or puma. So we did also look at the páramo. But we also asked, what is the average relative humidity of these cloud forests and how did that change? So sort of getting a look inside the cloud forest. So this super simple model was, we started out, what is the minimum cloud forest elevation? And for that, we used the maximum elevation of a mountain, what the relative humidity was at the base of the mountain. So how much water is in the air. And then also the region mattered. So we had one region was Caribbean islands. One region was areas that are subtropical, meaning outer tropics, et cetera. And we got these observations of minimum cloud forest elevation from the literature. We looked at studies like starting in the 1950s and Beard 1949. So these were just old vegetation studies where somebody was out there surveying plots and said the minimum elevation of cloud forest here is this many meters. We didn't account for which side of the mountain which side of the mountain they were on. We didn't have enough data for that. And there's a graph of the observed minimum elevation versus the predicted and how that model worked, and it worked pretty well. The different dots are different regions. So dry coastal regions, those were red areas. And then the yellow were the Caribbean islands, excluding Hispaniola, which was included with the main tropics, etc. So there we mapped cloud forests. And so the blue areas are cloud forest. You can't see the subalpine cloud forest. It's another color blue, but it's just a very narrow area in most places. And then the páramo or other sort of non-forest or non-cloud forest vegetation above cloud forest is that light color. And so that was our map. And then we used the same model to project future, frost, minimum cloud forest elevation. And also for each of those points, we got what the relative humidity was historically. And we used that as a minimum relative humidity to define cloud forests. And so we asked for a couple future scenarios, what might happen. And we used to define what decrease in relative humidity within the forest might be important. We looked at a couple studies in Monteverde in Costa Rica and in a study area in Peru where they've found changes in species distributions. So now there's lots more data to do this, as we just saw in the previous presentation by Marconi Campos. I've seen your papers, and so I know your last name, but I'm trying to remember your first name now. Sorry. So there's a lot more data for this now, and anyway, we just look at these two places. So from those studies, it seemed that you could be pretty sure that there would be a change in species with a change of about 3% relative humidity, a decline. So here are the scenarios. The top set of graphs are for 2040 with a as usual scenario, and the bottoms are for 2070. The dark and the most left-hand bar graph is all neotropical cloud forests, and the red, that's the percentage of area that would on average be below the cloud base height that used to be above the cloud base height. And so you can see that's about 20% in a worst case scenario in about 2070. And then the orange and the yellow are areas where the relative humidity falls by a certain percent. And then the blue areas are areas where the relative humidity stays the same. And the light blue areas are where there was an increase in cloud forest area. And these are mostly in very wet parts of the Andes, but nowhere in the Caribbean or Central America did these places exist. Everything reduces in relative humidity, and there's some increase in the cloud base heights. So here's an example of how that looks on a map. The current conditions with cloud forests and páramo, so páramo being the very light pale blue. And with the moderate scenario in 2070, those orange areas is where there would be a reduction in humidity of less than 3%. And then the dark red just on the edges is where the cloud-based heights would go above. And then there's this worst case scenario in graph C here, where there are very large areas where the humidity of cloud forests would go down by more than 3%, which we're assuming really would create a change for the various species. So here's where that came out for Puerto Rico. The blue areas are cloud forests now. I recognize that's a little bit larger area than most of our existing maps. And then for a worst case scenario, there would be this study projected a change in relative humidity of more than a negative 3%. So a reduction of more than 3% in relative humidity. And then some areas would be below the average cloud-based height. And this was similar for most of Central America and Mexico, sort of looked like that, except when you get all the way down to the Talamacan Mountains in Costa Rica and Panama. Everything else sort of looks like this. We found that overall 86% of tropical montane cloud forests are forested, and in the Caribbean and Central America, there is a lot of protection of cloud forest areas. We produced tables that show all of this by country and by World Wildlife Ecological Zone. So for each zone, how much change happens with cloud forest, with climate change, how much of that is protected, how much is deforested. It's all, we broke it all out. So if you need anything for a specific country or ecological region, it's there in the supporting materials. One thing, when you combine protection, deforestation, and climate change, we found that these areas in the Andes that suffer the least amount of climate change, some of them are the most deforested, where at high elevations in the Andes, that's where those are the densely settled areas. So especially that yellow area in graph B, that's around Bogota. And so there is sort of a mismatch in the Andes, where these densely populated areas are where the most deforestation is, and yet the climate conditions will be less severe in some of these populated areas. So to conclude, we developed a new method to map cloud forest areas and project future zones. We found that basically 60 to 80% of all neotropical cloud forests would be affected in some way, either through relative humidity declines or through being below cloud-based heights. And we also found that in a worst case scenario, that 98% of páramo would be affected because the frost line would increase and be subject to tree invasion. And also there was quite a bit of drying in páramo. And there was only less than 1% of tropical montane cloud forests would there be an increase in cloudiness or cloud forest area. And then again, as I said, cloud forests are mostly forested, except the northern Andes has quite a bit of deforestation of cloud forest. There's also quite a bit of deforestation in some other areas, like in Guatemala and in certain parts of Mexico, along the eastern coast of Mexico. There's quite a bit of deforestation. And as we know, climate change poses a risk to species.
Thank you.
One example species is the monarch butterfly that winters in places in Mexico. that are cloud forests, and they require cloudiness to regulate their temperatures.
Thank you, Eileen.
That's all.
Thanks. If anybody has questions for Eileen, we're going to wait for the next speaker because we're behind in time. Can you just put it in the chat and Eileen will be able to answer. And in the end, if we do have time, we'll give Eileen an opportunity to answer verbally. So thank you all for this. Now I would like to invite Aura to present. I'm not sure if she has access. So Aura is a former colleague of mine that we work together in Naturaleza, but also currently she is a PhD candidate in natural resources in the University of Vermont. She's currently the project manager of the Tropical Responses to Altered Climate Experiment. And she's basically interested in looking at the response of tropical forests to global warming is one of the largest uncertainties in predicting the future of carbon balance on Earth. She's really interested in determining the likely effects of elevated temperatures on tropical forest understory, plants, and soils. Aurea.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you. I am going to be talking to you about some of the outcomes from the TRACE projects. This is a project that we are conducting in El Yunque, and I was a manager from 2014 to 2018, and I still collaborate with the project. So I'm going to take you to Bajura Forest, or the lowland forest, and how it's responding to global change and climate change. We know that tropical forests generally have evolved for thousands of years under a current climate regimen, and it's 24, 26 Celsius from the average annual temperature. That has allowed these forests to be very diverse and to regulate global climate. Many times people don't know that disturbances are part of the natural part of these systems, and that includes hurricanes and droughts. But there used to be a return interval that was long and predictable in terms of the lifespan of human beings, of one person, for example. But climate is changing, and that interval is changing. It's shorter now. And as the temperature rises, this is speeding up the frequency of these events. Tropical forests have demonstrated, shown incredible resilience in the face of change. The tropical forest of Luquillo has shown that we are very resilient. This area is very resilient to many changes. We're talking landslides, etc. It takes more or less 60 years to go back to what they were before. However, we don't really know if these tropical forests will continue to demonstrate this resilience in face of the combined changes in climate and disturbance regime. For that, we have experiments that are valuable tools to answer this type of questions. And for this, we have this experiment TRACE that started in 2015 to understand the impact of temperature in these type of atmospheres. This is near Savannah in El Yunque, and we have 6 areas, 3 that are warming and 3 that are not. So 3 are control and 3 are experimental. These are open lots, as we can see here, and they have heaters, infrared heaters, to be able to warm that specific area. 4 meters in diameter. These 6 parcels, the 6 lots, were set up in 2015, but because of the droughts that we've had, that has been the most severe in 5 decades, we postponed it until 2016. So that first year was a year of drought and pre-warming. And then we started warming up in September 2016. We went up 4 Celsius grades up from the average temperature. throughout the year, 24 hours. This is the first experiment in situ to be done in a tropical forest ecosystem to monitor artificial warming. All of these other points are other experiments that are being done in other latitudes, but we were the first in a tropical area. But in 2017, you know that we had the hurricanes. We could not avoid these, and that really damaged the loss and the forest as a whole. There were many changes. So in 2017, September, so we stopped the warming efforts for these areas. And we had 1 year where we were monitoring the effects of the hurricane on the forest. And we were also maintaining or recovering all of these areas. So we started again in 2018, plus we were still monitoring hurricane recovery. This was a perfect moment to deal with this question: how does warming, drought, and hurricane disturbances affect tropical forests? Lowland, and we published some series of articles on the results of our experiments, looking at processes in microbes, lowland, soil biochemistry, growth of roots, to the effects of photosynthesis and other processes. So I'm going to give you just part of the results. If we have time for questions, maybe we can discuss a little bit more. So these are about herbaceous plants and ferns in these lots, and this graph shows that there is a change in the cover of open soil, cover of different types of plants, and this is drought, warming inside the gray box, and here we have the hurricane on the right, and we can see that warming and drought did not change much of what was happening in those parcels, but we do see some big change after the hurricane. So this was expected. We know that when hurricanes come, they herbaceous plants get more sun, and so there's going to be a change. But the cover of herbaceous plants was because of one specific species that covered all that. So hurricanes may cause more abrupt changes in tropical forests, understories, than longer term sustained warming. And then we're going to have opportunistic species like this one here can be detrimental to the recovery because they cover tremendously after the hurricane. It does not allow other species to grow. This graph shows us the phosphorus, soil phosphorus in the different lots. The gray areas are for the warming times before and after the hurricane. And the dotted line is the hurricane time. Initially, we didn't find that much difference with warming. But then after the hurricane, we saw that the warmed parcels showed more phosphorus, and it even kept going that way when we restarted warming. It's important because phosphorus is a nutrient, it's a limited nutrient. In other words, it's a nutrient that it's in the shortest supply and puts a limit on growth. And this is particularly true for tropical forest plants and soils. So we were asking ourselves, does this indicate in an increased soil fertility in a warmer recovering forest, or is it that there are just less roots to extract this available phosphorus? Is that the reason? So what is the answer? So we evaluated that, and you can see this in the graphic where we saw the dynamics for roots. We can see changes in the biomass production and mortality in roots. And we can see that before the hurricane, there was not that much difference from the warmed lots and the ones that were controlled. But after the hurricane, recovery for true roots was 30% less in the warmed lots than in the control lots. So maybe not only did warming reduce root production and biomass, but it also reduced roots capacity to recover after hurricane disturbance. So this could have a long-term consequence for the forest recovery. Finally, I want to show you results, an article that has been published. We are evaluating drought, hurricane, and warming. So we have flagellas and we have little trees. And what we found is that among all of the disturbances, warming raised the richness and diversity of plants. So that is not what we were thinking about. So we found that seedling and sapling communities exhibited strong resistance to a wide range of climatic stressors in this forest. We have also found that responses to disturbance and capacity for adaptation greatly vary between species and their capacity for adaptation. So past disturbances may have already selected for a range of species that are better adapted to survive in this forest. To conclude, the composition seems to be resistant in the temperature. Should warmer temperatures continue, it is likely that we see a shift in community composition and the composition of the forest in the future. These shifts take time, so we need to monitor for the long term in order to understand how the different disturbances are affecting the community. We also want to integrate above and below ground processes and all of the complex interactions that occur in the forest so that we can integrate them into climate models, because we need more information on the tropics, and that would allow us to amplify or expand or better understand what is happening in tropical forests in the long term with these disturbances. Thank you all for your help.
Thank the speakers for today. It was an enlightening session. I mentioned that we're going to be talking about studies that have been done from the oceans to the mountains, but we went even further and studied and looked at studies in the soils and even in the clouds. So thank you both, the two last speakers, for this. Definitely, we see shifting in species, we see change in the forest, we see change in the soils. So climate change is impacting both the island of Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. And I think all of us are working towards a direction of adaptation and making our islands and natural systems resilient. I have a few announcements. So once again, thanks, Aura. The session at 2 o'clock, I think Luis, our tech person, has put the links in for the sessions in the afternoon. So all of you are welcome. Welcome to the participants that are in the afternoon session. And I think I'm going to leave this room now to Lisa, who's going to be taking over from me as a moderator. Good luck, everybody, in the Congress today.